Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for your attention. My name is Judy Karioko. I am a program manager at IREX. It stands for International Research and Exchanges Board, but we go by IREX because our name is, it's quite a mouthful to say. And I'm honored to be here with you today to share more about our initiative, particularly on finding practical approaches and also proactive approaches that can drive change in addressing and redressing the online harms that we've been discussing. Pretty sure you've engaged with many stakeholders who have participated in FIFA, sharing how there are diverse harms that occur with the digital space, and now that we're living in the advent of the internet. So just to kick off with a brief overview of the initiative, I don't know whether the media team can help me with the clicker. Is active? Thank you. So just a brief overview of IREX. We are an international non-profit organization, and we focus mostly on global development and education. We were established way back in 1968, but we've been working across various countries around the world, anchoring our work on 4 key pillars of work, among them engaging youth, cultivating leaders of all levels of society, as well as strengthening education and civic and governing institutions, and also extending access to quality information and education across board, aiming to advance safer, just and inclusive societies. So for this particular initiative, it is being funded by the Gates Foundation, and the program itself is called the National Models for Women's Online Safety Initiative, and it is an initiative funded and implemented across 2 jurisdictions, that is Kenya and the Philippines. We kicked off implementation in October 2024, aiming to conclude around March 2026. Ourselves as IREX and our subsidiary and partner, Development Gateway, have been implementing this program aimed at also working not only with the civil society, but also private and other public sector stakeholders to ensure that we are catalyzing change in ensuring that the actions that we seek to roll out are driving and improving particularly women's engagement and leadership in the digital spaces. And just suffice to say that this work was also premised on previous work we have undertaken to combat tech-facilitated gender-based violence. And so the main objectives for this particular program are to enhance and ensure that we're expanding learning and evidence around regulatory and tech approaches across the different contexts we are implementing, that is Kenya and the Philippines, as well as trial out and seek out what systems level solutions can we have to curb TFGBV, and also, most importantly, advance and empower women's digital inclusion and in participation in tech itself, as well as support survivors of violence. So all our work is anchored in 4 main objectives, like I have mentioned earlier, to deepen understanding of TFGBV tactics and how it's manifesting, what is the contagion effect that it is causing to particularly those younger women or women who would otherwise aspire to front or engage in digital spaces, and also work collaboratively with the tech sector. Our second objective, pertaining to the private sector, is to also trial safety by design, which is a proactive approach that aims to anticipate the harms before they occur, and also ensure inclusion and centering user dignity. Another key objective of our initiative is to ensure that we are engaging governments to strengthen regulatory pathways that can support them and enhance their mandate in preventing and addressing TFGBV and other online harms. Again, our 4th objective is also to ensure that we are building self-defense resources for survivors across board. So for those who may not be aware about TFGBV, just to anchor us, there is no, I don't think there's yet a global agreed upon definition on what it is, but various work and engagement through the UN Women and UNFPA We've been able to coin the definition of it as violence that is committed, assisted, amplified, or also aggravated by using information communication technologies or digital tools in part or in full. This just means that essentially it's violence that's perpetrated using ICTs and digital tools, and it's important to note that it's not just violence that's happening online, but also through the use of digital tools that are not connected to the internet. Again, as you've heard before, TFGBV has very, very many impacts, including not only exacerbating physical harm, but many psychological, social, political, economical, and larger other infringements of human rights. And evidence around the world is continuing to show that gendered harms are continuing to impact women and girls in all their diversities differently, and there is an online-offline continuum to this violence. So there are very many forms of TFGBV around the world, but this is just a snippet of some of those instances. And those that pop out, cyberbullying, doxing, image-based abuse, and cyberstalking are some of the common factors that we've been able to map out in the countries of implementation. And also, just to note that in particular, with the advent of the internet, TFGBV has been exacerbated by these systems that are providing avenues for anonymity, automation, as well as also increased impunity, where people and bad actors are able to cause harm towards others without much being done unto them. And also we've had with the previous panel, the aspect of not being held accountable, the perpetuity of the problem, as well as its propagation, accessibility, and affordability of resources such as the internet. The fact that the bad actors are also acting from a distance and they are able to meet their violence from anywhere in the world at scale. And also the unfortunate normalization of violence where it's slowly being deemed as something that comes with being online or being in the public sphere especially. We've also noted the various impacts in terms of mental health, stigma, deteriorated life, as well as loss of opportunities, and most importantly, silencing or censorship, which is also a form of violence. And this is just on the individual level. And so how do we address this? And what are some of the mechanisms we can use to address this? The most important thing to note, and the problem that we are slowly kind of having, is that TFGBV is being relegated to just another women's issue, and it's not. It's an everybody problem, and noting that it's just driven by our behavior as humans and is propelled by technology. And the fact that if it's disproportionately affecting more than half of the population who are women, it affects all of society, and in terms of their systems level in democracy, in governance, in terms of security, the economy, and other aspects of public life, as well as ensuring that it's a multi-stakeholder problem that needs a multi-actor, I'd say, solution. So we all have a role to play in our own sectors and in our own capacities to ensure that we are contributing to the problem or addressing the problem. In terms of redress, three key components that we've been able to map out, including the aspect of reporting, because evidence itself built by reporting incidences and providing avenues where survivors can be able to articulate and name their problems, is able to drive change through advocacy, action, and also enhances platform accountability through the action that will be taken in redress. And such forums as FIFA have been very, very impactful in amplifying where such gaps are. And also, we have noted the survivor support is key in ensuring that support is given to survivors who are meted with online violence, whose pervasion is very, very intense and also happens on an instance. In terms of proactive strategies, that is where the Safety by Design portfolio comes about, and this is a strategy that seeks to relook and reposition the problem itself rather than having reactive fixes such as enhancing regulatory frameworks, preventing perpetrators from causing more harm. What if we relook it from a perspective of preventing the harm before it occurs? And this would take a lens at looking at how the tech itself is being designed and working with various stakeholders to ensure that all the safety features are embedded and the guardrails are built in to all tech, not just big tech, but also the websites that we're building, the apps that we're building, the chatbots that we are developing, and all the other digital platforms. So safety by design in itself is I'd say they are a set of principles, and they have been piloted in various jurisdictions, key among them the Australia jurisdiction by the E-Safety Commissioner. And essentially, just simply put, it's just an approach that aims to minimize digital threats and online violence by anticipating the harms and detecting it before it occurs, and also acknowledging the fact that the digital space is an avenue for everyone, and tech platforms and also developers and owners of the platforms need to take accountability of the harms that may be caused on their platforms, and burden the onus of preventing harm from the survivors. As users of digital tools, the responsibility of ensuring safety should not solely fall on the users of the platform. And so safety by design is more of a proactive approach rather than a reactive one, where when harm occurs, you reflect on it and fix it. But safety by design actually embeds all the features across the design process. Various institutions have also been able to roll out various aspects of safety by design. What you're seeing on the screen is an infographic by UNFPA, who center it as safe and ethical design, key to mitigating TFGBV, anchored by 3 key pillars of safety, security, and privacy of the platforms. And so as we kicked off our safety by design programming, we had to ground ourselves on what are some of these gendered digital norms and realities in the different contexts. And just to mention there are a few, we did note that there are very many similarities in terms of how gender norms are driving and perpetuating online harms, not just the traditional form of harms, but now the digital space has provided an avenue to propagate more harm, as well as exclusion, We've noted also the fact that the various harms are happening in different contexts differently, and the intersectionality in terms of vulnerability is also very evident. This is given that there are multiple identity factors that compound vulnerability to harm. For instance, those who are in public roles, those who are in leadership positions, the age of the users of the platforms, as well as issues such as disability status and where they're located. We've also noted an acceleration of sexualized, non-consensual image sharing, where emerging tech is used to mostly target women and girls, as well as create content, and especially amplified by emerging tech, AI deepfake. And of course, we have seen that this is having an impact on especially women in leadership, and also the future pipeline of aspiring women leaders, or those who would wish to otherwise aspire for leadership roles and pursue other public engagements. And again, an issue that cuts across all jurisdictions is the unregulation of digital spaces, and the burden solely being left to survivors. So we have been able to engage various sectors as we roll out the safety by design journey in Kenya, and altogether, we have been able to summatively engage around 220 stakeholders across board. And I think our process was very much rooted in how do we engage and secure the buy-in of local tech sector, not big tech. I'm talking the local software engineers, policy managers, UI, UX designers who work in Kenya. And these people, they usually run commercial tech platforms, so we were able to harness, first of all, we kicked off by understanding, so what is the experience like of an ordinary user of any platform? It could be a web page, it could be a fintech app, a ride-hailing app, or anything. And we were able to contextualize the voices and the experiences of various survivors, and at the same time convene various tech sector stakeholders, and also map out what are some of these key priorities, what are some of the norms and incentives that would help them be able to improve their platforms. And they were surprised also to learn that some of their platforms inadvertently cause harm. And another strategy that we used, we were ensuring that we are also bringing on board all the stakeholders, including civil society and also regulators. So aside from this, we were able to roll out various engagement and position safety by design as a key framework for safeguarding the Kenyan digital ecosystem. and have SBD, or safety by design, recognized by various stakeholders as an initiative that they could use to balance their business interests, their engagement, and their regulatory compliance, user dignity, as well as inclusion. So just to quickly run through some of the vulnerabilities we were able to map, include the issues of lack of culturally aware content moderation, which again violates survivors' rights, issues of anonymity tools that were flagged as toxic and unrestricted, issues of public shaming, aggressive debt collection through data breaches, as well as discriminatory refusal of service, particularly for persons with disabilities, which reflects ableism, and also the lack of just data privacy and provenance issues, where some citizens felt that the information was not adequately revealed to them. So some key priorities that survivors spotlight were the issues of capacity building, reporting systems, privacy controls, as well as undertaking various engagements. Absolutely. And so after the various consultations, we were able to come up with a curriculum or a toolkit that we deployed between the months of May and June, and we were able to train about 35 local tech sectors. Actually, I think it was more than that, around 50 of them. And safety by design, essentially, we were able to package it in a contextually aware manner, where we unpack what is safety by design and why does it matter, and what are some of these core principles of detecting, preventing, and mitigating harm on their platforms before they occur. How can they operationalize it? How can they build the safety by design culture within a company? It's not just a reactive fix. And also, how do we embed safety by design in AI, as well as building training into practice? So some of the issues that have been able to be mapped out by the developers who have been able to train include issues of data. They've been able to prioritize inclusivity, being transparent about how they're sourcing their data, also minimizing the data they collect on their various platforms, as well as anonymizing where necessary, and storage in compliance with data protection acts, as well as ensuring that they are accountable to the various tools that they are using, and setting up safeguards which are visible and invisible, and also improving accessibility, particularly for persons with disabilities. Also issues of refusal logic for those who are running AI bots or chatbots, and also using trauma-informed language in their builds, as well as multilingual and culturally aware tools, as well as real-time threat intelligence, and also red teaming, to ensure that they are able to stress test their systems and they continue to improve their iterations. So as we conclude, we will also be undertaking a study in partnership with one of the Gates Foundation partner, Galifect. They do have a chatbot on sexual reproductive health and rights. So we aim to anchor our research to understand whether actually deploying safety by design features would increase to improved use of technology. And as I sum it up, we did have some various takeaways that safety by design in itself is continuing to build trust and compliance among not just the tech sector, but also within regulators and users of the various products. And the fact that it's very, very important to adapt it to evolving threats, and that prevention is often more costly than crisis management. So we have been honored to have some of those key learnings pulled out from engaging with the tech sector. In terms of the engagement with the tech sector themselves and government, we would encourage that we continue to leverage and work with them as key stakeholders, and also utilize a non-adversarial approach which adds value across all engagement. And also the fact that we need to push and norm safety by design, which would shift industry perspectives and priorities, and that we have documented user consumer feedback for safer tools, as well as creating incentives for how, if you roll out safety by design, how this would meet demand, how it would make a good business case, as well as give competitive edge for various engagements. So allow me to conclude and say that as national model for women's online safety, we are open to continue engaging with you. Feel free to scan the code on your screen to access some of the resources that we have, and happy to continue engaging with you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any question if there may, as I welcome my sister Zanele to share.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Zanele, and I am research lead at Gender Rights in Tech. And I'll be sharing more of the practical side of what Judy has basically went through. So I'll be sharing GRIT's approach to community-centered testing of our AI chatbot called Zuzi, which we'll talk about further. But before we do that, I want to also introduce GRIT and who GRIT is and what we do. Which slide does this go? Oh, there you go. So GRIT, which is short for Gender Rights in Tech, is an NPO based in South Africa. We leverage technology to support GBV survivors with the whole mission basically of increasing conviction rates of GBV cases in the country. So we have 3 tech offerings, or digital offerings, I should say. Since the first one is our WhatsApp helpline. So this is a basic helpline where survivors can go in and ask questions about their cases, ask questions about where to get resources, what to do basically when they find themselves in sticky situations. The second one, which is my favorite, but not the world's favorite because it's not AI, is our GRIT app. So our GRIT app is more for emergency situations. It has a panic button that you press, and also then allows rapid response to come and find you wherever you are. It also has a vault that stores evidence for 10 years. So you can store live recordings on there, documentations, pictures of whatever incident that happened, and we store that for about 10 years. And we've had quite a few cases where when evidence used from the vault has been permissible to be used in court to help survivors build their cases. And then the last one is Zuzi, which we are talking about today, our AI chatbot. But before we go there, maybe a bit of background about how we came about Zuzi. So we saw that even through the WhatsApp helpline, even with the evidence collected through the GRIT app, that survivors really still struggle to navigate the justice system. It is quite a confusing thing to go through, especially when you have been violenced, and also if you're marginalized in the country as well. The kind of things we would see in our WhatsApp helpline would be survivors coming in and saying, my case is not going anywhere, and then getting frustrated and going on Facebook, exposing the perpetrators online, tagging them, posting their numbers, and then getting countercharged by the perpetrators, and then having to go through that whole process again. So then once we saw this, we then sat down with our communities and really opened up the discussion about what is happening, what do we need. And from those discussions and consultations came up the idea of we need a private space that I can just go to and talk about my case and ask questions about it, because the legal system is so confusing and intimidating for me. So that's where Zuzi, the AI chatbot, came from. Zuzi was co-created with our communities, so over 1,000 participants were involved in co-creating Zuzi. And how we did this, basically, we would go to communities to collaborate with other NGOs that work with survivors, work with general community members, sex workers, undocumented immigrants, a wide range of community members. And then we would sit down and design Zuzi ourselves. So Zuzi, the persona itself, was designed by our communities. We also collected legal language as well from our communities. So Zuzi speaks and understands the way that our communities speak about violence and speak about help. All of these sort of silenced disclosures as well that normal large language models would not be able to pick up. Zuzi is able to do that because it was co-created with our communities. So Zuzi provides legal information, also provides information on sexual health and reproductive rights, in simple, culturally relevant language. Also connects users to resources. So if you say, Zuzi, I'm stuck in Pretoria and I don't know what to do, Zuzi can then also recommend a place for you to go. Oh, there's a clinic nearby, there's a shelter nearby, wherever you are, to use these steps to get there. We're currently working on also deploying Zuzi or integrating Zuzi with WhatsApp and Facebook. This is, yeah, it's a bit tricky. And then Zuzi is also able to understand all languages in South Africa, although because it is built on a pre-existing large language model, that capacity is also not really reliant on us, but we do also sort of vector-based other data and other lingual data to be able to capacitate Zuzi on that. So you can imagine that for a chatbot that was that heavily co-created, that normal or traditional testing models would be quite difficult to use for Zuzi. We've come across some issues with that, and we do use normal testing models for sort of the technical parts of it, so for accuracy and speed and all of that, but those are not enough when we have built a chatbot that is so user and survivor-centered, and also is meant to hold safety and trust as one of its main principles. So these are some of the issues that we've came across when we're looking at traditional models. Number one, like I said, is the over-reliance on the technical benchmarks. Accuracy in this case is not just the factual accuracy about the information given. So I'll make an example. In South Africa or in any country where you have, I want to use a nice term, but not so efficient state institutions, you can give as factual information. We can go online, talk to government about how to go about getting a protection order, how to go about opening a case, and we can use that information and give it to our users. But if you look at what actually happens on the ground and how survivors actually navigate the justice system, that is a totally different conversation. So accuracy is not about the procedures that are available for us to get and tell the users, but accuracy is also about the accuracy and the reflection of how people ask for help and look for help on the ground. So that's what accuracy is. Another problem is the lack of cultural and linguistic sensitivity as well. And most large language models, even when built for an inclusive purpose, do not really center the ways in which survivors talk about violence. Survivors often, especially when we are sort of contended with these layers of marginalizations, if you're also poor and you're also a sex worker and you're also an undocumented migrant, there's different ways that you use to talk about violence. Often with euphemisms, often with coded language, often with coded disclosures. And so normal or traditional testing models are quite difficult to test for those things because they're not built to be able to handle those kinds of communication. The other one was the risk of harm through simulated scenarios. Again, chatbots are usually tested through synthetic, So normally, traditional testing models are often tested with synthetic or artificial prompts to test the responses of that. And we found that is quite an issue because if we are going to assume what kind of interactions that survivors have with a chatbot with Zuzi, then we also risk stereotyping those interactions and providing info or asking questions that actual survivors might not even be interested in asking. So we might be testing for things that are not even relevant to test for. So that's another problem that we'll talk about how we address that. Again, the inability to capture relational aspects as well. One of my personal frustrations when we talk about AI harms, especially for chatbots like Zuzi that sit in the intersection of access to a state institution and survivors, is that we do not really account for the network harms that come with the AI. So it's not just about what happens when we introduce an AI system or an AI chatbot to survivors, but it is also about what happens in the relationship of the survivor and the law, or the survivor and the justice system when you introduce an access AI system in between. And so traditional testing models, again, will not be able to account for those kind of network harms that we see. And then lastly is the static versus evolving needs. Again, testing models usually, you take the data, we test for it with the chatbot, and that's over, and it's done because we've tested for that capability. But again, for GBV survivors, for people who live in such violence, also needs are always changing. Language is also always changing. So there's always the need to go back and sort of reiterate and go back and check, is this still relevant for the people we are building for? And so testing then becomes a repeated, ongoing process. So then, how have we approached this and how have we made it different? The overall testing objective for a community-centered chatbot or any kind of technology is that it has to be able to provide accurate, safe, and culturally relevant information, but also do so in ways that are trustworthy and relevant for the users that we are building for. And one of those things, again, we will talk about later, is the issue of language, which is the most important part to access, again. So the testing focuses that we, amongst other things, so these are not to replace traditional testing principles. So again, accuracy, speed, all of these are important, but these were sort of the focuses that we had to pin down on to reflect the co-creation process. So one of that being is the tone validation. So is Zuzi speaking in the ways that you prefer and need to be spoken to when feeling vulnerable in these kind of interactions? And we've had quite a few issues with this when we first built Zuzi, and then we went back to our communities, and they hated how Zuzi sounded because Zuzi sounded too paternalistic, too babying. And I sat there and I thought, you know, it's quite interesting because when we actually try to reach for empathy in ourselves, we do get quite babyish. Oh, I'm sorry, and you know, quite paternalistic. And that's what came up in the chatbot as well. And our community members hated the fact that it sounded like that. And another one is context matching and factual journey mapping. Like I said before, that we can give those factual step-by-step instructions about how to go about getting a protection order, or how to open a case, or how to hold someone accountable, but those processes are not always reflected in the actual lived experiences of survivors. Survivors use very different ways of navigating how to go about help, how to go about getting justice that they need. And so is that reflected in how Zuzi speaks? Is that co-creative data that we collected before reflective in how Zuzi recommends things to you? And then there's the cultural language testing. Again, like I said, survivors often rely on euphemisms and slangs to talk about violent acts. I can give an example. As in South Africa, we do not like using literal words for body parts. And so you'll find all of these euphemisms for different body parts that a normal large language model will just not understand. And then there's also the issue of familiar app usage patterns. Again, when we were going around collecting co-creative data to build Zuzi, what I found was that the whole conversation about low digital literacy, especially in rural areas, especially in townships, especially amongst poor communities, was slightly a bit exaggerated. Community members were very literate in the apps that they use every day, very literate, in WhatsApp, in Facebook, in the banking apps. So our job was not to make the tech easy and understandable or dumb it down, but it was to match those usage patterns that were already there. How can we match some of the icons that are on WhatsApp, or some of the ways that you move around your phone to navigate WhatsApp? How can we mirror that in our own chatbot? So that's what we tested for, but then how did we do it? So this is my favorite part, because this is the part that gets a bit more practical. Number one was that if we are going to co-create with our communities and say that this is a co-creative tool, then we have to go to where our community members were. So for testing, that's what we did exactly. So we tested a lot with young people, with sex workers, undocumented migrants, and general community members. and we collaborated a lot with other NGOs that do grassroots work. We then extended all of that work to areas that we saw were mostly struggling to access the justice system, whether by distance, as in the court is too far or the police take forever to get me, or because of marginalization or the kind of work they do. So you can imagine how sex workers struggle as well to access help through the justice system. And then we also did work in the cities, like Johannesburg, Durban, Cape Town, the biggest cities where we also find quite a high number of our users, young people users. And then what I also found, especially in contexts where you find communities that have not been given the opportunity to participate in technology or AI, is that when you introduce the topic of building a tool or even testing for a tool, there's a sense of powerlessness and hopelessness that comes with technology, because I have not ever participated in the build of this. Our community sees technology as something very static, so it doesn't change. And harms are also easily digestible because they are static in this big tech thing that does not move or change. So one of the things we've had to do before we even start the testing process is to demystify technology and AI. And you do this by connecting it to systems that are already there. So you get there and you say, who has ever used Meta AI? Because that's something that a lot of people have been exposed to on WhatsApp. A lot of people have played around on WhatsApp a bit. And once you connect it to experiences that are already there, then you can start having the conversation. One of my favorite exercises is the bad tech exercise, where we basically give a scenario of an extremely bad app. This app has no working buttons, icons are not labeled, very bad. And then we sit down with our communities in a workshop, and we say, what makes this thing bad? What makes this thing harmful for you? What makes it inconvenient for you? To get into the mood of criticizing technology, of criticizing tech, so that tech can actually be bad and tech can be harmful. And then we start then introducing Zuzi, and then they're already in that mood to criticize, and they do criticize. Another strategy we use when we're testing Zuzi, like I said, instead of using artificial prompts or synthetic prompts, we ask the communities or the survivors to come up with real-life scenarios or real-life questions that they've had in their lived experiences, and then use those to prompt Zuzi, and then we can then assess the responses. And this helps a lot because we see prompts that we would have never, ever came up with. We see scenarios and realities that we would never, ever thought of. And it's only then we can know if Zuzi is actually efficient on the ground with the people that it is supposed to serve. From there, again, we test for tone. Did Zuzi give you the right answer? Or did Zuzi give you the answer in the way that you prefer it? Did Zuzi give the right recommendations, and so forth? And again, mapping local pathways to justice is another important one, because an important feature that people really like about Zuzi is that it connects you to other resources that you might need. And so, again, these resources have to match the things that happen on the ground. We've also sort of flagged institutions or orgs that have been said to not be so helpful. So if we know that in your area there's a clinic that really always discriminates against queer people, if you have told Zuzi that you're a queer person, Zuzi should never, ever recommend that clinic to you, because it's just not helpful. So is Zuzi really recommending helpful recommendations to you, and is it reflecting how you go about help and navigate help on the ground, and not just the nice factual stuff? And then the other part with which a lot of people also like in testing is the testing for language. So again, Zuzi, because it's built on a pre-existing large language model, is supposed to understand all languages in South Africa. The other thing is that written language and formal language is not the same as how people actually speak. So then we also test for when we go to doing these testing workshops, we ask people to use their languages, use the slang you use the codes that you use amongst your groups or in your community, and test if Zuzi can actually respond to that. And this is important because while we are building Zuzi, we had taken all of this co-creative lingual data. So we asked people to come up with slangs, come up with euphemisms that they actually use, and then we laid that onto Zuzi. So then by testing language as well, is that, thank you. By testing language, we also then testing for the co-creation that happened. Did we take data from people for nothing, or is this data actually reflected in how Zuzi speaks and how Zuzi understands us? And then my favorite part, but also the time-consuming part about testing, is that it repeats itself all over again, either with the same community, either with different communities. But we check to see if these feedbacks were actually integrated in the ways that the community members had intended them. Did we misinterpret them? Did we misunderstand them? And so we go back and say, we've incorporated these changes, but we need you to check if these changes are actually reflected in amendments. And that's basically just a little bit about how we approach testing. And I won't really talk about limitations much because most of these limitations are money limitations or funding limitations. So we would love to test in basically all provinces in the country, especially in places, like I said, experience the bulk of issues when it comes to access to justice, but then funding. We would also love to be able to not just have to say that the Zuzi can understand all languages, but to make sure that those languages are in the ways that people speak about them, which needs a lot of translating tools laid onto Zuzi as well. And then feedback is also, like I said, really one of the limitations is that interaction and feedback is also limited to the participants' willingness, which could really rely on anything. It could rely on the time you find them, the time of the month you find them. So that is something that you really work around as a team. And I'll leave it there. I think, like I said, iteration is time-consuming but really important and something that is also very hard to explain to funders. And like I said, also the power dynamics, especially when you approach communities that have just been overexposed to NGOs and all of that kind of work. There's quite a lot of work that you have to do to take community members back and to connect a tool to actual need. So yeah, that is it. Thank you. And I think coming up next, Judy will come and take over for the panel, and I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Zanele, and to Judy, the earlier presenter, thank you as well. Like we have heard, Zuzi speaks, but Zuzi also listens to the user need. But the question there lies that as Africa or the Global South, as we are trying to develop alternative digital platforms to respond to the issue of online violations, especially for the very marginalized communities or users in the digital space, such as women, youth, children, and other marginalized groups. The question then remains, how effective and sustainable are these developments against the Western pressures, but also its dominance as far as technology is concerned? And the greatest question there is also how relevant are these tools as far as our different communities within the African continent is concerned as well. And the biggest of it is the question of inclusivity as far as the intersectionalities are concerned, especially with persons with disability. I just saw one of our sign language interpreters asking for us to go a bit slow in order to be accommodative. It's a great question of discussion in that as well. So with no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, once again, my name is Brenda Namata, and I am a program manager at Pollicy, Pollicy is a feminist civic tech organization. We work on issues of data governance and digital rights within the African continent. And as Pollicy as well, we have been able to develop a number of AI tools that adapt to the alternative question to addressing online violations against marginalized groupings, but also trying to create a platform for the African continent, or platforms for African continents as alternative to the pressures that we do encounter from the big tech as far as the West is concerned with advancing them within Africa. And of course, encouraging further innovations. So that includes chatbots, it includes gamification, but most importantly, like Judy presented earlier, safety for design. We have taken an approach of ensuring that we center communities at the design of a number of these initiatives, and currently we are trying to create safe spaces, both in the digital and physical realm, to see that women, especially those mostly affected by online violence, are able to have safe spaces where they can express, share, but also contribute to the question of localized content moderation and the push on accountability of protection and policies in that regard. Please allow me invite our panel that is going to give a clear grounding to the question of effectiveness, sustainability, inclusiveness, against alternative solutions that we are creating with technological pressures. Allow me welcome Dej Sarumi. He's the chief fixer at Tech Hive Advisory Africa, where he leads the firm's strategy and implementation. He has extensive experience across telecommunications, media and technology, banking and finance, and capital markets. He has advised on landmark transactions locally and internationally. But above all, he is deeply passionate about digital transformation, data protection, and digital ethics. Dej, you're welcome. Our second panelist, indeed he looks a fixer. Our second panelist is Mariam Jamal. She's a lawyer and a master's candidate in technology and public policy at the Turin School of Development. She specializes in human rights-centered digitalization with expertise in digital identity, data protection, and inclusive digital public infrastructure. Mariam, you're most welcome. And of course, this panel is going to be joined in by Zanele, who was just speaking to us about Zuzi from the South African perspective, but I think as we carry on the dialogue, we shall get to realize that Zuzi is just one of the tools that are across the different regions, and perhaps the question of inclusivity to that regard, and if any threat even lies within these AI tools. And lastly, allow me welcome Judy as well to join the panel. Judy is from IREX. Again, as a reminder, she's a senior program manager, and Zanele is a researcher at GRIT. So you will just allow me join the panel setting for us to have a conversation. So thank you, and I would love to begin the conversation then with Dej. I guess we start from the fixing point of it, if there's anything to fix as far as the tools that we have just presented, just those that are examples of a number of alternative approaches that we are having within the African continent. The question then lies in the effectiveness and sustainability of these initiatives. What do you think as far as the technological pressures and Western dominance is concerned with what we are trying to develop in Africa?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm here to support, I'm just here to support, but thank you for having me. It's good to be here. So I think, well, here's my thought on this. As the Global South continues to grow, yes, in and technology developments continue to evolve, we're finding that NGOs, support groups, peer networks, and different CSOs are trying to also come up with sustainable solutions to challenge online harms and TFG, GB GPV as well, online as well. Rather than waiting for platforms and governments to create legislation and better moderation policies to make it work. Examples are what we've seen today with IREX, great stuff with IREX and also with GREAT as well, and also what Pollicy is doing as well. And I think, as far as I know, generally, I would say that they're quite effective, particularly because they provide a very social, cultural, relevant platform of support for, say, survivors or people that have experienced this in the past. And it basically helps create trust. So a lot of folks begin to trust these platforms because these community-led approaches, because they are more socially relevant or they're more socially nuanced than other technologies out there. Then also, from all what they're doing, you can tell that they are gathering data and evidence. I believe that some of this evidence can also be pushed to these platforms to be able to create better moderation policies and also help maybe create regulatory frameworks that can aid better and a safer online space for women and women generally and people generally online. And finally, what I'm seeing also is create a new system of governance. This community-led approach creates a new system of governance and reporting and supporting network, which is also very good. But on the issue of sustainability, one thing does come to mind is that a lot of those social media infrastructure tools that we're building, a number of them are still quite reliant on Western, let's say Western-backed tools, servers, GPUs and all. A lot of the locally trained models you'd find, a lot of them, right, are still reliant on GPT or BERT in itself, and that also has its issues because there are generally underlying biases, and also sometimes it is not very sustainable, which also leads into the issue of funding. So you find out that funding can be quite cyclical, right? So there are short-term grant projects, and a lot of organizations are not able to sustain it on the longer term, which does not make it quite sustainable. So in order to probably approach that properly, we will need to look at it from different lens and try to create a system wherein, let's say, we have regional collaborations to be able to fund projects better locally without having to rely on the Western world. Then also, we need to also bridge the infrastructural gap that we currently have. If not, I think what we're trying to do may not be sustainable in the long term. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Daj. For me, I think I take a point of biases, but then also the risk. I mean, Zanele just mentioned the question of extending Zuzi into WhatsApp and Facebook, and those biases could be one of the threats perhaps that we'll be discussing later. When you get to Mariam, we are speaking about a number of these AI tools, among other platforms that we are having being developed in Africa. How do we get to a point of effectively amplifying them beyond the specific regions or countries that we have, but also at the level of the safety by design approach? And those are really narrative approaches that we are talking about. How do we get to make them more centered within the health realm as a person who is coming from the side of digital rights and health?
So I'll actually start by mentioning the fact that I really like that Zanele pointed out that one of the issues they were having or experiencing with the communities they were engaging was what is actually termed as compassion fatigue. That's the word for it. It's compassion and research fatigue and a bit of resentment towards the civil society sector and the development sector because of how extractive collection of information and data has been over time. So one of the ways to amplify this best is to always make sure, and this is something I take very, very seriously. If you approach somebody and you tell them, like, this is what we're doing, you've experienced this and this and this, and we'd like to maybe get feedback from you or information from you, is that they should never, eventually, when the material or the product comes out, not be included. And that means whether it is at a launch, whether it is in use, because the thing would be that they get to see exactly what it is that you've put together, and they also become an ambassador of the tool. You get what I mean? So they also become an ambassador of the tool, so there's that. The second thing is compliance. When I say compliance, there's something that's always said especially engagements with government, for example, where you're asked, let's say, are you data protection compliant? And sometimes it's a very hard question because you realize you are advocating for data protection, you're advocating for, not like, you don't want people to abuse, let's say, women's health data, but then you as an organization are not data compliant, but you're still collecting data that you're then using to provide the product. So it becomes very counterproductive and kind of like, you're speaking from both ends, basically. So there's that. And if actually, eventually the data compliance leads to public trust, because you can always stand on your own 2 feet and say, yes, we are data protection compliant. Yes, we have mechanisms we set in place to ensure that this particular product we're putting out is actually a decent product. So that eventually allows for the amplification of the product because there's trust. So that would be my response to that particular question.
Oh, thank you very much. I guess then it poses the question before you come right in on the question of trust. As Africans, a number of times we trust products that are coming more from the West. I would trust an application or a platform coming from the US or the EU as opposed to something that is locally developed. How do you compare that of public trust, African public trust, vis-a-vis the question of amplification and assurance of data protection and compliance as far as those tools are? Yeah.
For this particular one, I believe it's because the systems are already in place, whether it is, like, let's say, in the EU, for example, the GDPR. The compliance is very heavily followed up on, and the regulation systems are there. So the reason why I started by saying that when you're collecting that data and you're not compliant, then there's no trust for you. So let me kind of, yeah, so I feel like I had already answered the question. That's why I'm slightly like a bit confused. But basically, if you can say that this particular product, you're data protection compliant, then that kind of speaks for itself. But then it's also because there's a data protection principle called the principle of purpose limitation. If you're collecting that data and eventually there's a fear that you will use it for something else because you are not even compliant to begin with, then people will be very averse to using the particular product.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we shall get back to the question of now the cultural or social context of African trust to the locally developed tools that we have. When we get to Zanele, the question of inclusivity, how do we have the other intersectional groups like persons with disability included within the AI developments like ZUZI as far as it's concerned, and even the question of the bother as far as usability is concerned for persons of disability in that?
I think we approach inclusivity in such an interesting way when the work in itself relies on collaboration. So inclusivity comes with collaborating with orgs you know have been doing work on the ground. And I think when we talk about inclusivity for tech tools, whether these are civic tools or government platforms, we think about people going out of their homes and walking and looking for people to include. But in the work that you're already doing, if you're a GBV org, you already have this collaboration because of the work that you're already doing on the ground. It also goes back to the issue of trust as well for this context, is that, I also struggle with trust being compliance, because how do you do that when you stand at odds with the government, that build these compliant policies and everything? And so trust goes in with the people that know the people on the ground, who's actually doing the grassroots work on the ground, who's been there when these people have been crying and have been abandoned by the government, who's been there in times of crisis. It's these orgs on the ground. And so you penetrate those communities through the collaboration that you've already been doing for the work. The other issue with inclusivity and trust as well is that who is making that tool? you know? So I'm not gonna trust you. A lot of committees don't trust people who all of a sudden spring out of the blue and propose a tool. It's better if you have been doing that work already, even non-technically, non-digitally. I have to see that you do care about GBV issues and you've been part of the community. And then you can come and propose the tool and then include me because I trust you because you have been doing work on the ground. I think trust is collaborative. Inclusivity is also collaborative in that sense.
Does Zuzi, before we move on to Judy, does Zuzi have elements of accommodating the diverse disability elements that we have? Because there was a conversation yesterday that we had, and persons with disability were actually indicating that a number of the AI conversations that we are having have an aspect of exclusion. Yeah.
So we've tried to include those in. So it's interesting, actually. If you build also for inclusion and you build for the most marginalized person, the tool works for everyone. So for things like people who are hard of hearing or people also who are blind and can't text Zuzi, there's a feature of the recording, so you can speak to Zuzi. We are now working on Zuzi being able to speak back, and we're trying to figure out a voice that is relevant for Zuzi to speak back. But we have those features in there, and then also, because Zuzi is also connected to our Grit app, that has the panic button, we also have features where users can then say that they're hard of hearing, say that they're blind, so that when they get those calls from rapid response, they know that this person won't be able to hear them, so that they can text them instead to get the help that they need. So it's a slow integration, but it's using what we have so far, and and listening to what people need.
Okay, thank you. And to Judy, how is the government being involved in the proactive approaches that we are developing? For example, the safety by design. How is it involved from the point of design, the point of adoption, and subsequently implementation back into the communities?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brenda. And I think also my other panelists have alluded to what you have asked. I'll just speak to how representation matters even when you're building the simplest of tools, right? With the advent of AI and more emerging tech, we have seen a pattern where nowadays you don't need even to just be a technical person to develop something. You can literally vibe code or think of an idea. There are AI tools out there that you can build and deploy, right? But then having safety by design as a perspective to consider when building, it kind of brings someone to, in retrospect, be like, okay, so who is the intended user of my product, and what are some of the risks that can be anticipated by deploying this tool, and how can I mitigate those risks either before they occur or even when they occur? What measures and safeguards do I build into the tool? So this also brings and ties in the aspect of including potential users of your product, either when you're designing it or whether you're testing it, or in the process of getting feedback on how your initial deployment is, then being able to circulate back and iterate the product and also deploy it back. The issue of ensuring that the product itself, the way they're being designed, is cognizant of the various harms that it can cause, unintentionally or even intentionally, yeah? So from the learnings that we've been able to capture within our implementation, we did learn that majority of the developers literally just build and deploy because there are many incentives that drive that. But then bringing them to a space where they can actually assess and say, okay, so does my tool actually achieve its intended purpose? Does it serve the users I intended to do? And if not, why? So finding ways to balance between your product, your business interest, the user dignity and priorities, and at the same time being compliant with the regulations that Mariam was mentioning, and just being sure that you're overall striking and finding a way to strike a balance. Through the safety by design initiatives, particularly in communities that have maybe perhaps not had the opportunity to assess their products or leverage on existing tools to build resources, we've been able to contextualize the concept in such a manner that can be understood, even with the basic developer, even someone who's non-tech, and also involving regulators, civil society, survivors of violence in the actual trainings and deployments and testing and prototyping tools that they can be able to deploy. And at the same time, we look forward to also incentivize some of the developers who can demonstrate some of the safety by design features they've embedded on their platforms. And in terms of resourcing for use and adaptation, we aim to publish the safety by design curriculum and also a simplified risk assessment tool that any product or any individual, even a regulator or just an ordinary person, can be able to self-assess any tool they want, and it would be able to, on the back end, map out some risks that would be affiliated with this tool and give some recommendations towards that. I hope I have answered your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Many times the government always indicates that as civil society, we involve it at the point of deployment as opposed to the design process of a number of initiatives that we do advance. So we wish to open up the floor for plenary. Any questions or additions to what our distinguished panelists have just submitted? We can take about 3 or 4 questions. Okay, there's a question right behind there. Thank you. And there, you can just use the microphones on the table. Thank you.
Great. There we go.
Right. Yeah.
Hi. Very interesting question about the Zuzi app. I'm really quite interested in that. Coming from rural South Africa myself, I do know that there's definitely a need for so much more information and assistance there. 2 questions on that. I was in Kenya a couple of months back, and there was an organization that decided, an organization that has created an app, a zero-rated app. So for people to actually engage with AI. I'm not sure if you guys would want to connect with them, because understanding, yes, in rural areas, there is access to smartphones, but not always access to data. And what could be done in that kind of instance? And then my second question is, of course, around the data protection of these women. What kind of framework is in place with Zuzi itself to protect their data, especially that the large language model is based off of the international ones, even though you guys are trying to build that in as well? Those 2 questions.
Okay, thank you. I guess we shall take the question as well from the gentleman behind.
Hello, my name is Ivan Pino. I'm from Uganda, and I lead an organization called Digital Woman Uganda. We are also in the business of building apps, especially around gender-based violence. So my question goes to the panelists next to you, the lady that has, I think, developed an app. I didn't hear about the integration of our local languages in the development of the app, because it also speaks to inclusion, especially for those in the rural areas, wherever you're working from. 2, what kind of technology have you deployed, especially for those that don't have internet access in the rural areas? Can they use that app? Where I come from, our app was integrated with interactive voice response to only cater for those rural women who have no internet, who have no data, or who have no airtime to basically interact with us or the gender-based violence wherever they are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. There was a lady who had a question here. Yes, please.
I don't know if it's me.
Oh, yes, you can go ahead.
Okay, good morning. I'm interpreting for Toini, Miss Toini Nakundi. she is asking how is the app designed to include persons with hearing impairment? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we shall take those round of questions before we get back into a second round of questions. And I think the questions would be answered first by Zanele and then Dej on the question that was asked on guaranteeing data protection while relying on external technological servers. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the questions. Yes, I would love to be connected to that org. So the Grid app itself is data free. So you don't need data to use the Grid app, just data to download the app. With Zuzi, because it's AI, we're still trying to figure a way around the same approach as well to have it be data free. As it stands, no, it does need data. And we are also honest about where Zuzi can be used. We've gone to some rural areas where we walk out and we know that Zuzi will not work here. Like no one will be able to use Zuzi here because of just the infrastructure. There's no network, there's all of these things. What we are looking at as well, even for the app, is USSD codes. And what we are playing around with is how do we translate AI into USSD codes? How would that look like? We're really just playing around with that for now. I don't know what the future could look like for that. When it comes to language, so Zuzi is able to understand all languages, especially in South Africa. We've had people test Zuzi in their own languages. What we come in and we try to add that layer 4 is that it should not be formal language. So you know how a lot of large language models can represent formal is Xhosa or formal is Zulu, but no one actually speaks like that. And so we do train the model as well to understand slang, to understand how people actually talk in that language on the ground. And the more we test for that, the more users use Zuzi in that way, the more Zuzi also gets better with correction. So all languages are represented, all 12 South African, 11 South African languages are represented in Zuzi. Did I forget anything else? The data protection is also quite a difficult one. So when it comes to signing up into Zuzi, we take almost no data. So no name, don't give us anything. What users would have to give up is their phone number to sign in. And that phone number, again, is all of that information is tokenized. It's not used for anything. So we also cannot really look at chat interactions and connect them to any identifiable person. And again, we do the whole issue of we take as little data as we can. We've had auditors come and ethical hackers come and try to penetrate Zuzi and trying to see how Zuzi can be broken down. And we've had quite successful testing with that. It's really cool what hackers can do. So we like again, because we use pre-existing large language models, our biggest fight is that we don't want to take any other personal data that would connect those interactions to people. I hope that helps, yeah.
So the question on inclusion of persons with hearing.
Hearing
Impairment, yes.
Yeah.
And visual.
So Zuzi is text-based, so you could text with Zuzi. There's also the issue with lighting. So I think on the app you can also then change the sort of the lighting settings to match what you can visually be able to work with. And then we have voice to text as well. So you can speak to Zuzi if you can't text, then you can speak to Zuzi. And the only unfortunate part as of yet is that Zuzi will still answer in text. So that's where the issue of voice comes in, is that we're also still working on Zuzi's voice and also how to then translate text into voice for users.
Okay, thank you very much. Dej, I think the question on guaranteeing data protection while we heavily rely on external servers from the West.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to say well done to what you're doing. So a lot of questions are targeted at you because you're building something amazing. Very well done. And I know it's a lot to do. Voice, text, everything. Very well done. On the issue of data protection, and it's something I mentioned before, we are quite reliant on the models built in the West. And there's only so much one can do, particularly complying with either regional laws or laws regionally or locally, depending on where you are. So, for example, where I think she's Popia, for example, if she is complying with that, for example, there is little to nothing she can do in terms of protecting the data if, for example, the company she picks to use to train a model, for example, decides to use that data for its own purposes. It's usually in the fine print. You find what we usually advise a lot of times is looking at the fine print and looking for more ethically compliant institutions that do have these large language models. The problem is it's still a business regardless, and despite efforts being made, you would find out that there's still data being collected by these companies regardless because it's a business. It's a business. So what folks like Zuzu can do is comply locally where they can. But at the end of the day, as long as we don't develop our own models locally and be able to control the narrative, we will continue to rely on external factors that we cannot fully control, regardless of what happens. Because at the end of the day, you have to use what is available to train or use your data. And as long as we cannot control these data sets locally the way we can for our own purposes and in cognizance of our own local laws and regulations and regulatory frameworks, we will continue to be reliant on the pressures from the West and the dominance of what they choose to be acceptable based on their own terms and conditions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we shall take 2 more questions. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panel. And I truly love the idea of Zuzi. Why? I'm a lawyer and a lawyer who works with women and children especially, okay? Now, one of the main concerns that have come up, especially when it comes to the reporting system, is the anonymity, okay? I would request that you speak on that, anonymity, but why I would is because most of the women who reach out prefer anonymity because they're able to express exactly what happened. I come from Uganda, where some of the sexual concerns or sexual offenses that come up have to be spoken of quietly, you know? And I don't think that's a Uganda issue only, it's an African issue. We do not easily talk about some of these. And so we find a lot of these perpetrators and offenses being, you know, brushed under the carpet, okay? Now, the issue that would also come up is because of, I'm hoping Zuzi has an anonymity, you know, system in place, verification. Verification. There are so many people who misuse anonymous lines or toll-free lines where they'll report you know, a matter that they are going through. Some will just call for fun to see that it's working. And I know that because I work for an organization where people can call in anonymously. Some will just call and say, oh, I just wanted them to see if it's working. So the issue of anonymity, how are you handling it at Zuzi to make sure that you verify what exactly is a true anonymous concern and one that is just a group of people who are trying to figure out what Zuzi is? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Hello, my name is Sharon and I'm from Kenya. I really like the idea of safety by design. I've supported Judy in the process and I've been part of it, which I really absolutely love. And I do appreciate the kind of work that the panelists are doing as well, individually. My concern or a comment would be, I'm just posing a question, why we are asking consistently for inclusivity and especially with the languages and local languages at that, and in the spirit of do no more harm. How do I put this? In the spirit of do no more harm, how do we then also look at the other aspect of how local languages can be used to perpetuate violence because of contextual connotations? For example, for the Kenyans in the house, when I say cousins, it is highly divisive currently in our local context. But really the meaning of cousins is very nice. I mean, we are related, right? But in the local context, it is something that can be very divisive, can cause violence at large. So in the process of us asking ourselves, or even trying to include more local languages, how are we then ensuring that they're not going to perpetuate violence in the spirit of do no more harm?
Okay, I'll take the last question from there.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Karib Masusu. I'm a Zambian, and I'm a digital health rights advocate. My contribution or question is really related to something that was mentioned about verification. And I think most of the inputs around how some of these chatbots work, how we ensure security, is really around calling us back to the human aspect of how these sort of tools operate. And my question really was touching on misinformation. Yesterday we were in a session in here where one of the speakers mentioned that sometimes these chatbots, they could cite information in perspective, information that has not yet been produced, but it will still give you like a warning to say this, and there are certain times when it will give you information which is not really verified, but it will still mention. So my question is then, how do we ensure that the responses, the information that these participants are interacting with on these platforms is verified, is accurate, especially when it's health information? Yes, really that was really just my question. How do we ensure that it's the information that these chatbots is verified, is accurate, and can be traced to really, sources that are legitimate? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I would give a minute to all our panelists to respond to the questions that have been asked, but also your closing remarks as well. In a minute, each one of us. I would start with Zanele.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that question, because it's something we do struggle with, especially with our community. We find that we sometimes, when we build for security, access becomes difficult. When we build for access, security becomes tricky. So like I said, what we use to log in and to verify is the phone number, because a lot of people don't have emails. A lot of people just don't want to be going and accessing their emails to be able to log into Zuzi. So verification is happening through phone numbers and like that. But then that is then putting at odds also the issue of security, like you said, and people coming in just to check what Zuzi is about. So that's also something that we try to figure out with our tech team as well, with all of these audits, how to then have accessible verification processes that do not push people out from actually accessing Zuzi. So I don't have a good answer for that one. And then closing remarks. I don't have much. Thank you for the engagement and the questions. Please also do meet me afterwards if you have recommendations or just anything. This has been an amazing conversation. Thanks.
It's okay, to Mariam.
I'll respond to the question on language, and I like the fact that you're from Kenya, because there's some really good work that Kiktanet, for example, has done in Kenya on building the lexicon around technology-facilitated gender-based violence, in particular. And the reason why I support like Kiktanet's work without even any association to them is because I like the work that is being done cannot be done in silos. It requires a lot of collaboration, and it also requires a lot of resources. Meaning, if there's a way that people can be able to come together and collaborate as much as possible, it will be easier to build the lexicon around, especially technology-facilitated gender-based violence. So that's my response to that.
Thank you. So, I listened to the questions from the lady there, the one debate on the other one, and they all tied together in different ways. So it is possible to eventually have models that can spot, those contextual nuances and questions that, in different languages. It is very possible, but it takes time to train these models, which requires funding, right? And, I know a lot of questions are targeted at the lady over there. And, I would also like people to also target her for funding, because a lot of the things that are required require funding. Because it takes time to train these models to get it up to speed. Even concerning the health data, for example, ensuring it's accurate is also a very hard ask in itself, and would either require real-time training over time to ensure that the health information remains accurate as of when it's needed. So, for me, they all tie together in the fact that there is a lot needed for such technologies to scale locally, and it requires time and funding to be able to train these models to do the work that they're supposed to do in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think for me, as I also answer the questions and share my closing remarks, I'd just also love to reiterate what my fellow panelists have shared, particularly in terms of data and how we are sourcing and how we're building our tools. It's very, very important to have that question in mind. What is the provenance of this data? How was it built? Who's included? Whose voice is missing? And as the developers, or as the tech sector, or as CSOs, or as the ones who are building these platforms, we have a duty, a moral duty, and also an obligation to be open and honest and say, this platform is built with data sourced from XYZ, and it may also provide either biased opinions or also unpopular opinions, or even information that could be misleading based off of certain limitations. And I think those are some of the important aspects we need to put in place, especially now that there's effort to also build Africa-driven data sets, as well as capturing our indigenous languages. And that's also very much reinforced that beyond the tools themselves, beyond the computation of the AI, there's also the human aspect, because they're being trained on data that has some biases that are there based off of our relations, how we've been socialized, our background, and every other engagements that we unintentionally or even intentionally sometimes build on to the tools that we deploy. And also, just to finalize and say that it's important that we continue to work together collectively, not just as CSOs or at the tech sector or regulators in silos, like what Mariam mentioned, but just having this concerted effort to move together, not only within our particular countries, but also as a region, as a globe, because I mean, the digital space is here for all of us, and the more we harness lessons from others and capture and also continue to collaborate with each other to have intersectional abuses and harms being addressed from specific pain points, and ensuring that all individuals that may be also impacted by the platforms we're building are addressed collectively. Thank you very much, and it's been an honor.
Thank you so much, our dear panelists. And from us as Pollicy, we indicate that as Africa, for us to redefine ourselves technologically as far as digital and data governance is concerned, we need to be able to adopt, but also reinvent ourselves from an Afro and community-centered perspective, which is able to capture our unique experiences, but also to leverage this for moderation and accountability thinking from technology and our respective governments. Thank you so much, and once again, thank you so much to our panelists, and wish you the very best as we conclude FIFA. Thank you.